John Constantine, a Hellblazer podcast.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to John Constantine, a Hellblazer podcast. Today we're reading episode number 104, and just a little catch-up on what's been going on. A couple of story arcs back, John separated himself into two different people. One had all the bad stuff in it, and one had all the good stuff, and he was able to trick the First of the Fallen and the Demon Boar into taking the bad John down to Hell as payment for a deal they had brokered. And John figured that would be the end of that. All the bad stuff that he does not want in himself, like the demon blood and, his certain personality traits and even some of the memories of Kit, were put into the second John, along with a writer along, I guess, to make it more realistic or something. He had to fuse into that the soul of Aleister Crowley, who was in hiding from the First of the Fallen. So John did that. He did the trick. The First of the Fallen, of course, was angry, but he decided to take it anyway as payment, so he wouldn't have to deal with John Constantine anymore, and he could kind of torture parts of John, at least, in Hell. And this seemed like a fine solution, except that John hasn't been feeling quite himself in the last couple issues. He kind of feels like he doesn't have any direction or drive. There's no motivation for him to do anything. So obviously he had to do something about this, as John went to go talk to one of his old friends named Wong. And John, I guess, had kind of figured some of this out and suspected what he had to do, but he wanted to confirm it with Wong. But basically, Wong told John that he needs to follow some of the things that are in the I Ching, and if he does that, he will find himself. So John has been on a journey, and the first place he went was Ravenscar to find out stuff about his old self. Then in the last issue, he got reacquainted with evil when he went to a fishing village that had a serial killer hiding in it. And at the end of that issue, as John was walking away from the village, we saw he was walking towards a mountaintop, which is the last part of the I Ching, and John was greeted by the evil version of himself, and that is where we left off in the last issue. So first things first, with issue 104, we got the cover. We see what looks like fire and brimstone in the background, and in the foreground, we see a smoking John Constantine, who's looking deeply into the eyes of a woman that he's sweeping backwards. It almost looks like they're about to kiss, but it could also be that she's dead and he's cradling her in his arms or something. And we also see on the cover that this is written by Paul Jenkins with art by Sean Phillips. And as we turn to the first page, we get some panels that show memories of Hell and what this evil John went through as he explains it all to John. So we see demons coming at him with pitchforks. We see the second man, Aleister Crowley, also in there with him being tortured. And evil John says, "Somewhere inside me, there's another person screaming to get out. This person's name is Crowley. We were fused together and sent to our damnation, but he's the only one who feels the pain. Crowley has a rather quaint picture of hell, all demons and devils and Hieronymus Bosch paintings. He's petrified of having a pitchfork rammed up his anus. In truth, though, he just imagines himself to be petrified. Crowley's seen no more than a fraction of hell, really. But a fraction of hell. But a fraction of hell is all the hell you need. I've tried to make the best of the situation, to ignore the awful bloody racket inside me. All that yelling and swearing, though. Thing is, John, I've been far too busy watching what's been going on down there to care about the daft wee laddie and his pitchforks. Hell wasn't what I expected, I must say. After all, you and I have seen a few bit and pieces of it in our time, eh? Turns out, what we always saw was just our own personal hell. I expected damnation to entail some kind of physical torture, hooks and chains and so forth, but that would be too obvious, wouldn't it? In reality, hell is an incessant mutilation of the soul." Then we get some imagery of this damned evil John Constantine from when he first arrived in this hell. So we see him arriving, and he's all fresh-faced and everything. His body is not decaying yet, and evil John continues. "First thing I discovered was that I was different. I mean, you made me that way, didn't you? God, I want a bloody cigarette. That was my first thought after I touched down in the abyss. And suddenly, there they were. And in this panel, fresh-faced John is just touching down as he arrives in hell. And like he said, the first thing he thought of was he wanted a cigarette, and all of a sudden, a pack of silk cuts appears in front of him. Then we see him walking through hell, exploring and observing what's going on in the different areas. In one of those areas, we even see John watching a trial happening, but it looks like a mock trial for someone who's already in hell. And the further John is walking in these panels, we do see his face is rotting more, he's getting more decomposed, so it definitely seems like hell is having an effect on him. So over these panels, Evil John narrates, "So, armed with 20 silk cut and a squadron of Guinness, I set about exploring the netherworld. The sights I've seen, John, all that time and effort devoted to the flagellation of the human spirit, it really is funny when you think about it. We're just whipping boys for the Almighty's dirty conscience." Then a big smile comes onto Evil John's face, and he says, "That's about it, really. I've been drinking and smoking a lot. Crowley says to say hello or fuck you or something." And then he leans close to John, getting in his face a bit, and he says, "Well, don't you have anything to say?" And as John takes a drag of his cigarette, he says, "Yeah, one thing does spring to mind as a matter of fact, John. Why are you talking like a great big fucking girl?" And also on this page, we see that the name of the issue is Difficult Beginnings Part 3, The Darkening of the Light. And to what John said about Evil John being a girl, Evil John begins to laugh and says, "Ha ha ha, I'm so glad you kept the facile side of our personality. Actually, John, I can be just about anything I bloody well want these days. I know almost everything now, and I'm learning more all the time." And John replies, "Must be hell for you, mate, being so bloody erudite." Then we see Evil John pull out a cigarette, and he lights it by conjuring some green fire in his hand, and he replies, "Oh yes, it really is, but I'm able to get by. After all, I'm a free spirit now. I've plumbed the sort of depths you always aspired to. True, I'm rather stuck in the confines of Erebus, but I'm able to console myself by enjoying all the palaver and intrigue. I like to watch the suffering, you see. To borrow a phrase from my former self, it's all just a bleeding laugh, isn't it?" And I should say, while Evil John is kind of talking, he's walking around our John, and I guess to be dramatic and to make a point, he likes to move really quickly, so every now and then he'll just turn fast and surprise John, I guess to just be a dick or something. And he also has really long fingernails, and they look very sharp, and it kind of seems like as he's turning, he's almost hitting John with them, like he's trying to cut him or something. So he does one of these quick turns and surprises John, and John's cigarette falls out of his mouth, and Evil John smiles and says, "Well, that's enough about me. What have you been up to, John? Same old shit is my guess." And John replies, "You know what I've been up to, Tosser, and you know what I want." And Evil John kind of leans back as if he's enjoying this, and he says, "Course I do. I just want to hear you say it." So a fed up John looks at him and puts his hands out like he's giving up, and he says, "All right, I want to get back together again." And Evil John begins cackling, and he says, "Christ almighty, you are a funny bastard, aren't you?" And he wipes at his eye with his wrist like he was laughing so hard he was crying. And he says to John, "Look, let me tell you a little story, okay?" Then we turn the page and we get a flashback sequence of Evil John standing at the edge of a pit in hell. And he's looking down at all these souls that are writhing in pain as they are being burned alive. And he's drinking a bottle of Guinness and, of course, smoking. And Evil John narrates, "So there I am, farting around somewhere in the Malbolgia, watching the eternal struggle of the damned as I'm downing pints of Guinness, right? One day, I'm out by the tar pits, trying to work out who I am in all this. As far as I can tell, you see, I'm some kind of maverick entity. None of the rules seem to apply to me. Still, I'm fairly nervous, as you can imagine. I'm thinking, maybe this is all just a build-up for the inevitable torment to come. Maybe I'm just being lulled into a false sense of security. And that's when he shows up." And by he means the first of the fallen. So from behind Evil John, the first of the fallen appears, and he says, "You useless little prick." And Evil John turns around to face the first, and Evil John narrates, "Well, you go with what you know, don't you? So I try to give him a bit of the old trenchcoat verbal." Then we see Evil John say to the first, "Hello, mate. Nice place you got here." And the first points at him and says, "Fuck you. You're not even the proper Constantine, so shut up." Then the first makes a big movement so his cape flies up as if he's trying to intimidate Evil John, and he says, I bet you both think you're so bloody clever, eh? But you're just adding fuel to the fire. I can wait, believe me. I've got forever. And then he turns to leave and he says, I'll bloody get him. Both of you. I swear. Then we cut back to present where Evil John is talking to John, and Evil John finishes his story saying, he didn't, of course. And here you are. Here we both are. And we're going to stay like this. It's much better for us, John. We're untouchable. So in a move to try to bluff Evil John, John begins to walk away and he says, fair enough, I suppose. Can't blame me for trying, eh? But Evil John takes a seat on a rock and he conjures up a Guinness and another cigarette and he says, oh, Christ no. I would have done the same. No hard feelings. And John, still facing away from him, has stopped walking and he's turned back to look at Evil John and he says, yeah, well, since you're so sodden special, mate, mind telling me what happens next? And then Evil John throws what looks like a ketchup packet or something at him and he says, all right. Just for old time's sake, you understand. And as John catches the packet and looks at it in his palm, he says, Jesus, what the bloody hell is this for? And then Evil John stands up and walks away and he says, honestly, John, if you don't know that by now. Then he walks away into some ethereal blackness, and then we turn the page, and now all of a sudden, John is surrounded by fire, and he's shielding his eyes from the flames. And it seems he's been brought to a different area now because the flames begin to dim and we can see his surroundings are now of him in a cave and there's the silhouette of a person sitting on a rock in front of him. And over these panels, John narrates, demons are stupid. Only a demon would be moronic enough to trust a devious fucker like me, for example. Only a demon would be daft enough to set up house in the middle of the inferno, given the choice of a billion possible locations. Only a demon would be so downright unimaginative as to hide in hell to escape the devil. And we see the person who's sitting on the rock is facing away from John, and once the fire dies down, John recognizes the person immediately and he says, hello, Ellie. And she seems surprised to hear his voice. So like John said, only demons are stupid enough to trust him, and I guess because John's evil self wanted to mess with John a little bit, he sent John to Ellie's hiding place. Maybe Evil John discovered it while he was walking around the depths of hell. But in case you don't remember, Ellie is a demon who is a succubus from the Garth Ennis run of Hellblazer, and she had helped John out defeating the First of the Fallen, but as part of that, John had to carve some sigils into her in order to hide her from the First of the Fallen's wrath. And I guess as part of that, she was hiding from him, and she decided the best place to hide from him is the first place he wouldn't look, which is the First of the Fallen's own hell dimension. So I'm assuming Ellie has just been sitting in this cave for however long it's been since that ceremony took place with John. So upon hearing John say hello, she stands up and turns around and says, John, what are you doing here? Did anyone see you arrive? And John answers, I need to see you. It's important. Put the burner out, eh? And as Ellie makes the flames go even lower so John isn't surrounded so much by them, she walks towards him over a stone bridge and says, John, you can't be here. You could get hurt. God, you don't even understand, do you? This isn't a game. And then John meets her in the middle of the bridge and says, I know exactly where I am, Ellie. Believe me. I just couldn't live with myself knowing what I've done to you. It didn't seem right. Made a mistake, that's all. And I came to ask you to forgive me. To help me. Then we get a panel of her just staring at him, and over this panel, John's narration says, she's a contradiction, this one. On the one hand, she's hellspawn, brutal, contorted evil in a fair female form. On the other hand, though, she's a caricature of femininity, an amalgam of all the stupid, naive little ideas we lads have about womanhood. A complex battleground of seething, conflicted emotions. A failed succubus who was too fair-hearted to do her job properly. She fell in love with an angel, the silly young thing. Then Ellie turns away from John and says, John, don't. Shit, why'd you have to come here? And then John walks over to her as her back is turned to him, and he reaches out like he's going to put his hand on her shoulder. And his narration says, and since I'm the only one alive who knows her secret, she's an easy target for my manipulation and subterfuge. And as John puts his hand on her shoulder, he says, Ellie, you know why. I love you. So obviously from his narration, this is all just a trick. John is trying to manipulate her in some way. But it seems like Ellie's believing it because she gets pretty frightened at this and pushes John away and says, You can't! You don't know what I'd do to you! And John replies, Ellie, please. And then John falls to his knees begging, and as he looks up at her, his narration says, Confusion overwhelms her. She's been all alone in the universe, secretly longing for a moment like this. And then John begins to even cry with crocodile tears, I guess, and he says, I didn't want to hurt you. I never wanted that. And then Ellie gets on all fours, like she's trying to read him maybe, and she looks into his eyes, and John's narration says, Her emotions boil quickly to the surface. All I have to do is tap into the correct ones, and I'll hit the jackpot. And then John says to her, I wanted to be here with you. And as she stares at John's face, she grabs his head and says, It's okay, John. It's okay. And then she kisses him, and then John's narration says, Bingo. So it seems in her desperation and longing for some kind of contact or the reaching out of someone to her, she has fallen for John's little ruse. And with that, John continues kissing her, and then as we turn the page, we see they begin to undress and make love right there in hell. And over these steamy panels of them undressing and making love, John's narration says, I'm everything she wants me to be. I'm strong, sensitive, vulnerable. I'm Jack the Lad and the devil may care. I'm a right lying bastard. Ellie lays her demon aspects to one side. She wants to be my mother, my daughter, my lover, my saint. She's helpless under the onslaught of my heavy sighs, fairway looks, and honey-laden whispers. She wants to give me everything she's got, and in turn, she becomes everything I need her to be. Her mouth tastes of demon breath, charcoal and malice and spite. Fighting waves of nausea, I absorb that side of her. Images of illness flash through my mind. I swim in the contaminated lake of rape and lust and exploitation. Then as they both climax, she's saying John's name, and John says, Oh, that's it, whore. And then his narration continues, I whisper the sweet nothing she desperately needs to hear. It's all good, unclean fun, isn't it? So I think I was actually wrong before when I thought that the evil John was the one who sent John to this place. I think after evil John rejected John's offer to rejoin, John thought of another way to get some evil in him to get a bit of his edge back. So he went to Ellie, and that's what he was talking about in his narration of saying, you can't trust John. He was talking about himself, John, not evil John. And this is confirmed because as we turn the page, right as they climax, it seems like Ellie realizes what has happened. John has taken something from her. And as she pushes him off, she screams at him, and we begin to see her transform into her demon form. And she yells at John, You fucking used me! So she turns from a very beautiful woman into a winged demon who is covered in green spikes and scales. She still has a bit of a humanoid form because besides the wings, she's got arms, legs, torso, head, all that stuff. But now she definitely looks a lot more reptilian. She even has a forked tongue. And as she stands over John, John just sits there and lights a cigarette, and his narration says, And now she drops her cosmetically enhanced exterior and exposes her true self. She's a whore, a hag, a polluted harridan monstrosity. And I just fucked her, royally. And then John stands up and faces her and says, I wouldn't do that if I were you. And she screams back, I'm going to rip your face off, you fucking blister. No one does that to me. No one. But John doesn't really seem concerned. He even pulls out another cigarette, even though he already has one lit in his mouth, and he very casually lights the second one. And as he does this, he says, Yeah, that's the trouble with someone beating you at your own game. Feels like shit, doesn't it? Well, guess what? This little episode's nothing. Fact is, I shafted you a long time ago. Then he throws his original cigarette into the flames below and replaces it with the second one he lit. Then we turn the page and we get a flashback of the moment John was carving the sigils into Ellie's skin in order to try to hide her from the first of the fallen. And John says to Ellie, narrating over these panels, It was something I meant to tell you before. Slipped my mind, really. Remember that night I drew up that masking sigil? The one that protects you from your boss? Well, you know how it is, love. I had no bloody clue what to expect from you, did I? I didn't know you then. So I smeared some of me own blood into the mix, just to be on the safe side. Then we cut back to present, and we see John begins to walk away from the very angry-looking Ellie, but she is just standing there listening to him, And we see him get his clothes from the ground, and he begins to dress, and he continues saying, I never meant to use it, honest. I cared, or at least I used to care, but I always kept it in the back of my mind, that you're an evil slag, Ellie. That's why you're in hell. So I'd say there's a fairly good reason to keep me alive, really. And as he finishes dressing, he looks right at her and he smiles and continues saying, 'Cause when I die, the sigil loses its power. And as John walks away from her, Ellie is at a loss for words, and all she can say is, You! And as John straightens his tie, he turns his head back to her and says, Oh, leave it out. Don't be so bloody naive. You remember what I told you then? One of these days I'm going to collect. Guess what day this is? And as John leaves Ellie standing in this fiery cave, his narration says, I've heard it said I can be a right nasty sod at times. Well, it never hurts to prove it to all concerned, does it? And as he leaves Ellie's realm, he calls back, Have a nice afterlife. Then we turn the page and we cut to a pub, and John is inside with all his friends. There's Rich and Michelle and another guy, I can't remember his name, but that one is yelling at the jukebox and banging on it saying, You evil bastard! You evil vicious bastard! That was me last pound coin, you poxy cheating metal bastard! And John is laughing to himself at this scene, and then he finishes his pint, and his narration says, I'm a bad lad once more, albeit a reasonable facsimile thereof. I've had my wicked way with another fair succubus, and lived to tell the tale. Still, you know what they say about a woman's scorn. Probably going to cost me, this is. In the meantime, I feel pretty lively, as a matter of fact. And then John hands his empty glass to the bartender, and he says to her, Thanks, Simone love. Can you get us some matches too? Ta. And as the bartender reaches for the matches, John's narration says, It's a bit artificial, of course. No doubt Mother Nature's scratching her head again, wondering what to do with me. But it's still another notch in the belt of my dubious accomplishments. Now, I'm as naughty as I want to be. I can turn the wickedness on and off like a tap. I'm a whole person again. Good, bad, and different, and hopefully very drunk very quickly. And as the bartender brings the matches and puts them on the table, and also gets John another pint, John flips a coin to her, and it lands on the bar, and as it comes to rest with whichever face is side up, John looks at it cautiously like he's just checking to make sure the coin isn't the same face it had been previously in the first issue of this arc. But it seems like it's okay because John begins to drink his pint, and we also see Rich and Michelle watching the television like something has just come up on it that they need to pay attention to, and John's narration says, Course, just as I get all full of myself, the world decides to remind me just how insignificant I really am. The fact is, compared to some, I'm still a bloody amateur. Then we see Rich point to the TV and say, Oh no, look at that, eh? Stupid bastards. That's fucking horrible, that is. And it's kind of hard to see what's on the TV. There is a panel with a close-up, but it's very scratchy and not detailed. But from what I can see, it looks like the police are guarding a construction area where heavy machinery is tearing down houses, and we see police are keeping back elderly-looking people as the demolition happens. Then we get the last panel of this issue, where we see John isn't looking at the TV, he's staring straight ahead, and his eyes have gone fully white, and he says, Yeah, Rich, horrible. So maybe he's having a vision of some kind now, but we'll have to find out about that in the next issue. So if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains and comicbooks, all one word, @gmail.com, and we will see you on the next one.